The great hall of the Concord Assembly stretched for nearly a mile. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness, and floating platforms carried delegates from 100 different species. Light from distant stars poured through crystal windows, casting strange shadows on the ancient stone floor. Ambassador Yara Chun stood at the entrance and took a slow breath. She was small compared to most of the beings here. The Tarathi delegates towered above her like living mountains of gray flesh. The Kelish moved on legs of light, their bodies shifting between solid and transparent. The elder species of the galaxy had ruled these halls for 10,000 years. Humanity had been here for only 300. A Concord official guided her to the human platform. It was small, placed near the back, far from the central speaking area where important matters were decided. Yara did not complain. She had learned that humans were considered useful, but not important. They were traders, workers, colonizers of unwanted worlds. They were not decision makers. The session began with trade disputes and border agreements. Yara listened and took notes. Her real purpose today was simply to be seen, to remind the Concord that humanity existed and wished to participate. During a break in the proceedings, a figure approached her platform. It moved slowly, its four legs clicking against the floor. The being was covered in gray scales that had once been bright blue. Its eyes were large and tired. Yara recognized the species from her studies. This was a Veeth, from a civilization that had once been powerful, but now controlled only 2 small colony worlds. "Ambassador Chun," the Veeth said. Its voice was soft and carried a slight whistle. "I am Council Imreth of the Veeth Remnant. I wish to introduce myself." Yara stood and offered a small bow. "Council Imreth, I'm honored." Mreth made a gesture that might have been surprise. Few ambassadors from larger powers bothered with such courtesy toward the Veeth. "I have a small gift for your people," Mreth said. "It is nothing of great value. But I noticed that your colony ship, the Horizon's Dream, is scheduled to travel through the Keseth Nebula next month." Yara nodded. The Horizon's Dream carried 12,000 colonists to a new world on the far side of known space. "The Keseth Nebula is dangerous," Mreth continued. "The official charts do not show all the gravity wells and radiation pockets. My people mapped that region long ago, when we were still explorers. I would like to share our maps with you. They may help your ship travel safely." Yara was quiet for a moment. This was indeed a small gift. Star maps could be purchased from many sources. The Veeth charts might save the Horizon's Dream a few weeks of careful navigation. Perhaps they would prevent a minor accident. It was, as Mreth said, nothing of great value. But Yara had been raised on Earth, in the city of Lagos, in a family that kept the old ways. She knew what her grandmother would say about this moment. "Council Mreth," she said, "I accept your gift with deep gratitude. Please know that humanity will remember this kindness." Mreth made the whistling sound that served as Veeth laughter. "You humans and your remembering. Other species find it strange, you know? The Tarathi delegate told me that humans build monuments to beings who gave them a cup of water during a difficult journey. He finds it amusing. We do build such monuments," Yara said. "And we do not find it amusing at all." Mreth studied her with those large, tired eyes. "You are a curious people. I wish you well, Ambassador Chun." That evening, Yara returned to the human embassy and entered the Chamber of Records. It was a simple room with white walls and a single terminal connected to a database that existed on every human world. In every human ship, in the memory of every human government, she spoke clearly as she made her entry. On this day, Council Mreth of the Veeth Remnant offered star maps of the Keseth Nebula to humanity. This gift was given freely and without expectation of payment. The maps will protect the lives of 12,000 humans aboard the Horizon's Dream. This kindness is recorded in the Terran Ledger of Bonds. It will not be forgotten. The terminal accepted her entry. Somewhere across the galaxy, the record was copied and stored and preserved. It would exist for as long as humanity existed. Other species found this practice strange. They called it sentimental, inefficient, even obsessive. The Concord's intelligence services had written reports about it. Human psychologists were studied by alien researchers who could not understand why this one species cared so much about keeping track of every small favor. Every act of help, every moment of mercy, thought the answer lay in human history. Though few aliens cared to study it deeply. 200 years ago, humanity had nearly been destroyed. The Geth Dominion had decided that human colonies were expanding too close to their territory. Without warning, they had attacked 12 human worlds. Millions died. The survivors fled with nothing. The Concord had done nothing. Humanity was too small, too weak, too unimportant. The great powers watched and calculated and decided that interfering would cost more than humanity was worth. But 3 small species had helped. The Mirathi had given water to refugee ships dying of thirst. The Alessans had offered sanctuary on their stations when human colonies burned. The Solani had shared medicine when human children were sick with alien plagues. These kindnesses had not saved humanity. Humans had saved themselves, eventually, through luck and determination and the discovery of a hidden world where they could rebuild. But those 3 species had made survival possible during the darkest months. They had offered help when no one else would. Humanity had survived. And humanity remembered. On Earth, in the great plaza of New Lagas, 3 monuments stood. They bore the names of every Mirathi, Alessan, and Solani who had helped humanity during the crisis. Flowers were placed at their bases every day. Children learned their names in school. Nearby, in a separate section of the plaza, stood a row of empty stone platforms. They were called the plinths of reckoning. Each one bore a name and a date, and a simple description of harm done to humanity. No flowers grew there. The stones were kept clean, but cold. A Concord intelligence officer named Voss had visited this plaza once. He was Kellish, a being of light and ancient memory. He observed the humans placing flowers at the monuments of kindness. He had watched them walk past the empty plinths with hard, quiet faces. He had returned to his ship and written a report that his superiors ignored. The report said simply, "These humans remember everything. They repay kindness with kindness that seems excessive and irrational. I believe they also intend to repay cruelty. I do not know when, but I believe they are waiting. I recommend we study them more carefully." No one listened. Humanity was small and weak and unimportant. But the ledger grew longer every year. And humans were very, very patient. 50 years had passed since Counselor Mreth gave his star maps to the young human ambassador. In that time, much had changed and much had stayed the same. The Concord of 7 still ruled the galaxy. The elder species still made the important decisions. Humanity had grown a little stronger, a little richer, but they were still considered minor players in galactic politics. They traded, they colonized distant worlds, they kept to themselves. Mreth was old now. His scales had faded from gray to almost white. His legs moved slowly, and he needed rest after walking even short distances. He had retired from the Concord assembly years ago. There was little point in continuing. The Veeth had no voice that mattered anymore. The Veeth sun was dying. It was not dying quickly, as stars sometimes did. It was dying slowly, growing unstable, producing radiation that made their homeworld dangerous. Within 50 years, perhaps less, the Veeth worlds would be uninhabitable. Their entire species, all 800 million of them, would need to find a new home. Mreth had spent his retirement begging for help. He had approached the Tarathi. who had once been allies of the Veeth in ancient times. They had calculated the cost of relocating 800 million beings to new worlds and decided it was too expensive. The Veeth had nothing to offer in return. The Tarathi said no. He had approached the Kelish, the beings of light who remembered everything. They expressed sympathy. They offered no ships, no worlds, no resources. They said no. He had approached the Concord Assembly itself, requesting emergency intervention. A committee was formed. Studies were conducted. Reports were written. The conclusion was delivered in calm, measured language. The Veeth remnant was economically non-viable for rescue operations. The galaxy's resources could not be spent on a dying species with nothing to contribute. Mr. ETH had received this news in his small home on the Veeth colony, world of Lesser Veth. He had sat alone, in the dark for a long time, 800 million souls. His children, his grandchildren, the last members of a species that had once built great ships and explored unknown stars. They were going to die because no one thought they were worth saving. In his desperation, Reth remembered a small moment from 50 years ago. A young human ambassador who had accepted a gift of star maps with deep seriousness. She had said something strange. Humanity will remember this kindness. Other species had laughed at human sentimentality, but Mreth had nothing left to lose. He sent a message to the Terran Republic. It was simple and direct. He explained the situation. He did not beg or make promises. He simply told them what was happening and asked if they could help. He did not expect a response. Why would humanity care about the Veeth? They had shared some maps 50 years ago. It was nothing. A small favor between small powers. The humans probably did not even remember. The response came in 6 hours. It was not a polite acknowledgement. It was not a promise to form a committee. It was a mobilization order. The message said, Councilor Mreth, we remember you. We remember what you gave us. The Horizon's dream arrived safely because of your maps. 12,000 humans lived because of your kindness. We are coming. Hold on. Reth read the message 3 times. He thought there must be some mistake. 3 weeks later, the first Terran ships appeared in Veeth space. There were hundreds of them. Some were colony vessels, designed to carry thousands of passengers in comfort. Others were cargo ships filled with supplies. Medical frigates accompanied them, ready to care for the sick and elderly during transport. Admiral Okonkwo commanded the fleet. She was a tall woman with gray hair and calm eyes. When her ship landed on Lesser Veth, she walked directly to Mreth's home. The old Veeth could barely stand. He was shaking. I do not understand, he said. We gave you maps. Only maps. This is. He could not find the words. Admiral Okonkwo smiled. It was a warm smile, though there was something hard beneath it. You gave us maps, she agreed. Those maps saved 12,000 lives. Children grew up because of you. Off because of you. They had children of their own. Some of them are on these ships right now, come to help you. But the cost, Mreth whispered. The resources. This must be ruining you. We will manage. Why? I do not understand why you would do this. Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because you helped us when you had no reason to. Because kindness must be answered with kindness. Because we remember. The evacuation took 3 years. It was the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. Every Veeth was offered transport to a new world, a planet in Terran space that humanity had been preparing for their own colonists. The Terran Republic gave this world to the Veeth freely. They asked for nothing in return. When the Concord observers asked why humanity was bankrupting itself for a species that had given them only a minor favor half a century ago, The humans seemed confused by the question. "They helped us," they said, as if this explained everything. The elder species did not understand. The Tarathi calculated that humanity had spent enough resources to build 3 new colony worlds of their own. The Kelish observed that no rational species would make such an exchange. The Concord Intelligence Services wrote reports expressing concern about human psychological abnormalities related to debt and memory. But among the smaller species of the galaxy, a different message spread. The Mirathi heard about it. The Alessans heard about it. The Solani heard about it. Species who had been kind to humanity during the crisis watched what happened to the Veeth and understood something important. The humans meant what they said. They really did remember. They really would repay kindness with kindness, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Small delegations began arriving at human embassies. Species who had been afraid to approach the great powers came to humanity instead. They offered friendship. They offered trade. They offered small kindnesses, hoping to be recorded in the Terran Legerdot and in a dark corner of the galaxy. The Keth Dominion watched with growing unease. A Keth intelligence officer named Vorath had observed the Veeth evacuation from beginning to end. He had studied the human response, analyzed their resource expenditure, mapped their fleet movements. His report to the Keth High Command was brief. "The humans remember everything," he wrote. "They repaid a small kindness from 50 years ago with an act of generosity that defies rational calculation. They will clearly sacrifice anything for those who helped them." He paused before writing the next section. 200 years ago, the Keth Dominion destroyed 12 human colonies. We killed millions of their people. We burned their worlds. We offered no mercy. If humans remember kindness this way, we must consider how they remember cruelty. I recommend immediate diplomatic contact to explore reconciliation options. The Keth High Command read his report. They laughed at his fear. Humanity was small and weak. The Dominion had the largest military in the known galaxy. What could humans possibly do to them? They threw the report away. This was a mistake. 20 years after the Veeth evacuation, the galaxy had changed. The Terran Compact was no longer a small alliance of minor species. It had grown into a power that rivaled the Concord itself. The Veeth had joined, of course, grateful beyond measure for their salvation. But they were not alone. 14 other species had pledged themselves to humanity, bound not by conquest but by memory. The Mirathi, who had given water to dying human refugees, now had human hospitals on every one of their worlds. The Alessans, who had offered sanctuary during the crisis, received Terran protection against raiders who had plagued them for centuries. The Solani medicine that had saved human children was now manufactured in joint facilities, distributed free to any species that needed it. Every act of kindness recorded in the Terran ledger had been repaid. And the smaller species of the galaxy had learned a simple truth. If you helped humanity, even once, even in a small way, they would never forget. They would never abandon you. The Concord of Seven watched this transformation with growing concern. The Tarathi calculated that the Terran Compact now controlled 30% of galactic trade. The Kelish observed that human influence was spreading faster than any empire in recorded history. But it was not conquest. It was something stranger. It was loyalty, freely given and freely received. And in the halls of the Concord Assembly, delegates began to whisper about the other side of human memory. The Keth Dominion had prospered for centuries. They were conquerors, expanding their territory through military strength. Other species feared them and paid tribute to avoid destruction. Their fleet was the largest in the galaxy. Their worlds were rich with stolen resources, but the Keth had not joined the Terran Compact. They had not been invited. Ambassador Yar Chun had retired long ago. Her successor was a man named David Okafor, a calm diplomat with patient eyes. When asked why humanity had never approached the Keth about trade or alliance, he simply said, "They are not in the ledger of kindness." Everyone knew what that meant. For 220 years, humanity had been building a record, not just of kindness, but of harm. Every colony destroyed during the crisis was documented. Every human death was named and counted. Every Keth commander who had ordered an attack was identified. Every ship that had fired on refugee vessels was traced. This information was gathered slowly, carefully, across generations. Human historians traveled to every world that had witnessed Keth aggression. They collected testimony from survivors. They preserved evidence in archives that would last for millennia. The Keth did not know how thorough this record was. They did not understand that humanity had been building a case, not for war, but for something more devastating. On the 220th anniversary of the crisis, Ambassador Okafor stood before the Concord Assembly. Behind him, holographic displays showed images and documents that had never been made public before. "We are not here to make accusations," he said. "We are here to present history." For 6 hours, he spoke. He named every destroyed colony. He showed footage recovered from wreckage, recordings of Keth ships firing on civilian targets. He presented testimony from human survivors who had watched their families burn. He identified Keth officers, some of them still alive and holding positions of power. And he did not stop with humanity. The record included Keth crimes against other species, worlds that had been conquered, populations that had been enslaved, resources that had been stolen. Humanity had spent 2 centuries documenting not just their own suffering, but the suffering of everyone the Keth had harmed when he finished. The assembly was silent. "We are not asking for justice," Okafor said. "We are asking for witness. We are asking the galaxy to see what was done and to remember." Then he announced the response of the Terran Compact. It was not war. The humans did not threaten military action. They did something simpler and more terrible. Every world in the Terran Compact closed its ports to Keth vessels. Every trade route through Compact space was denied to Keth merchants. Every resource that flowed through human-allied territory was cut off from the Dominion. The Vith joined the embargo. So did the Mirithi and the Alessans and the Solani. So did 14 other species who remembered what the Keth had done, not just to humans, but to themselves. The Keth ambassador rose in fury. His name was Lord Vectrus, and he was descended from one of the commanders who had ordered the destruction of human colonies. "This is economic warfare," he shouted. "You are strangling us over ancient history. These events happened 200 years ago. The beings responsible are dead." Ambassador Okafor looked at him calmly. "The beings responsible are dead," he agreed. "But the Keth Dominion still exists. It still profits from the worlds it conquered. It still uses the resources it stole. It has never acknowledged what it did. It has never apologized. It has never changed. You cannot punish us forever for the actions of our ancestors." "We are not punishing you," Okafor said. "We are simply choosing not to help you. We are choosing not to trade with you. We are choosing not to forget." The embargo began immediately. For 200 years, the Keth had built their economy on trade routes that passed through space now controlled by humanity's allies. They had assumed these routes would always be open. They had assumed no one would dare challenge their power. They had not understood that humanity was not challenging them militarily. Humanity was simply remembering within 5 years, the Keth economy was collapsing. Worlds that depended on imported food faced shortages. Industries that required rare materials fell silent. The great Keth military, which had terrified the galaxy for centuries, could not fight an enemy that would not attack. The Keth High Command considered war. They would break through the embargo by force. destroy the human alliance, and restore their dominance. Then their scouts reported what they found at the borders of Terran space. Defense stations. Thousands of them. Armed with weapons that had been quietly developed over 2 centuries. Positioned at every approach, every jump point, every route into compact territory. The humans had not been building monuments and keeping records. They had also been preparing, quietly, patiently, for generations. They had been waiting to see if the Keth would change. They had been hoping, perhaps, that an apology would come, that reconciliation would be possible. But they had also been ready for the alternative. The Keth fleet was large, but it would break itself against those defenses. The humans had known exactly what they were doing. They had never planned to attack. They had only planned to endure. Lord Vectros sent a private message to Ambassador Okafor. "What do you want?" he demanded. "What will end this? Name your price. Territory, resources, tribute. What will satisfy you?" Okafor's response was simple. Acknowledgement, apology, change. We will wait. The Keth refused. They were proud. They were powerful. They would not humble themselves before a species they had once nearly destroyed. So humanity continued to wait. And the Keth continued to suffer. And the galaxy watched in silence, finally understanding what human memory truly meant. The monuments in New Lagos Plaza still stood. The plinths of reckoning still bore their names and dates. But now the galaxy knew that those empty stones were not just memorials. They were promises. 5 years into the embargo, the Keth Dominion was dying. Not quickly. Not dramatically. It was dying the way a tree dies when its roots are cut. Slowly, silently, from the inside out. Worlds that had once been wealthy were now struggling to feed their populations. Industries that had built warships now sat empty. Young Keth, who had grown up believing in their empire's invincibility, watched helplessly as everything collapsed around them. Rebellions began on the outer worlds. Species that had been conquered by the Keth generations ago saw their chance for freedom. They rose up against weakened garrisons. They declared independence. They reached out to the Terran Compact for recognition and support. The Dominion was fragmenting in the capital city of the Keth homeworld. A provincial governor named Executor Van watched the chaos with growing despair. She was young by Keth standards, only 80 years old. She had been born long after the crisis, long after the destruction of human colonies. She had inherited her position from a grandmother, who had served under the commanders who ordered those attacks. Van had spent her entire career trying to reform the Dominion from within. She had argued for apologies to humanity, for acknowledgement of past crimes, for a new relationship based on honesty rather than pride. She had been ignored, mocked, and finally exiled to a minor administrative post far from the centers of power. Now she watched as everything she had warned about came true. The hardliners in the High Command were planning a final, desperate attack. They would gather every remaining ship and throw them at the Terran defenses. They would break through or die trying. They called it Operation Redemption. Van called it suicide. Late one night, she composed a message to the Terran Republic. She did not go through official channels. She used a private communication system that could not be traced by Keth intelligence. "My name is Executor Van," she wrote. "I am provincial governor of the Keth Dominion. I was born after the crimes my people committed against yours. I have spent my life opposing those crimes and trying to change my government's course. I have failed. The High Command is planning an attack. It will fail. Your defenses will destroy our fleet. Millions of Keth soldiers will die. And then the hardliners will use this defeat to justify more hatred, more war, more suffering. I want to offer you something. I have access to records of ongoing Keth war crimes against other species. Current crimes, not historical ones. Evidence that could free billions of beings from Keth oppression. I will give you this information in exchange for sanctuary for myself and the 200,000 Keth who have opposed our government's policies. We are not innocent. We benefited from our empire's crimes, even as we opposed them. But we do not want to die in a war we never supported. And we do not want our children to inherit our ancestors' hatred. Please respond. The message reached Ambassador Okafor's desk within hours. He read it 3 times, then called an emergency meeting of the Terran Compact leadership. The debate was fierce. Admiral Okonkwo, now 93 years old, watched from a medical chair. She was too frail to stand, but her mind was still sharp, and her voice still carried weight. She listened as younger leaders argued about what to do. "We should reject this offer," one commander said. "The Keth destroyed our colonies. They murdered our families. They have never apologized. Why should we save any of them? Because if we do not," another voice answered, "we become what they were. We condemn an entire species for the actions of their leaders. We punish children for the crimes of their grandparents. Our grandparents died in those colonies. Our children were orphaned, and their children did not pull the trigger." The argument continued for hours. Both sides had valid points. The pain of the crisis was real, still alive in human memory after more than 200 years. The desire for total justice, for complete accounting, was strong. Finally, Admiral Okonkwo raised her hand. The room fell silent. "I was 12 years old during the crisis," she said. Her voice was weak but steady. "I remember watching the sky burn when the Keth attacked my homeworld. I remember my mother carrying me to an escape pod while the building collapsed around us. I remember floating in space for 3 days before rescue came." She paused, breathing slowly. "I have spent my entire life serving in our military. I commanded the fleet that evacuated the Veeth. I have overseen them, construction of the defenses that now protect us from Keth aggression. I have earned the right to hate them. But hatred is not what we are. Memory is what we are. And memory must include not just what was done to us, but what we chose to become in response. The Keth who destroyed our colonies are dead. The Keth who are asking for sanctuary were born after those crimes. They have opposed their government. They have tried to change their world. They failed, but they tried. If we reject them, we tell the galaxy that species are forever defined by their worst members. We tell them that reform is impossible, that change is meaningless, that no one can ever escape the sins of their ancestors. That is not the message I want humanity to send." She looked around the room. "We remember kindness. We remember cruelty. But we must also remember mercy. Otherwise, the ledger becomes nothing but a list of grudges. And that is not what our ancestors built." The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would accept Executor Van and her followers. The transfer happened secretly over several weeks. 200,000 Keth crossed the border into Terran space. They were not welcomed warmly. Many humans still hated them, still remembered the crisis, still wanted revenge. But they were accepted. They were given shelter. They were allowed to live. Van met with Ambassador Okafor on a neutral station. She handed over the evidence she had promised, files documenting Keth crimes that were still ongoing on a dozen conquered worlds. It was enough to justify intervention, enough to free billions of beings from oppression. Why? Okafor asked her. Why betray your own people? Van was quiet for a long moment. Because my people betrayed themselves 200 years ago, she said. When they attacked your colonies without provocation. When they murdered civilians. When they chose cruelty over coexistence. That is the betrayal that matters. I am only trying to undo some small part of it. You know many of your people will hate you for this. Yes, but perhaps some of them will eventually understand. Perhaps someday, when this is all over, Keth children will learn that there were some of us who tried to do the right thing. Perhaps they will build monuments to us. She smiled sadly. You have taught the galaxy something important, Ambassador. You have taught us that memory matters. That what we do echoes forward through time. The Keth forgot that lesson. We are paying for it now. Perhaps, someday, we will remember it again. 3 weeks later, the Keth hardliners launched their attack. It was exactly as Van had predicted. The Keth fleet was massive, the largest military force assembled in generations. They came at the Terran defenses with everything they had, hoping that numbers and fury would break through where strategy had failed. The battle lasted 6 days. The Terran defenses did not break. They had been designed by engineers who had studied Keth tactics for 2 centuries. Every weapon, every station, every ship had been positioned with perfect precision. The humans did not fight with rage. They fought with patience, with planning, with the cold efficiency of people who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. When it was over, the Keth fleet was destroyed. Millions of soldiers were dead. The Dominion's military power, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was gone. The Keth High Command surrendered unconditionally, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next. 1 year after the Keth surrender, the galaxy waited for vengeance. Every species expected it. The Tarathi calculated the territory humanity would claim as reparations. The Kelish predicted centuries of tribute payments. The Concord of Seven debated whether to intervene if humanity demanded the complete destruction of Keth civilization. History was clear on this point. When empires fell, they were dismembered. When conquerors were conquered, they suffered the same cruelties they had inflicted. This was the way of things. This was what power meant. Humanity did something different. Ambassador Okafor announced the creation of the Galactic Tribunal for Memory. It would not be a court of punishment. It would be a court of witness. The tribunal met on a neutral station at the edge of known space. Representatives from every species were invited to attend. The Keth were brought not as prisoners, but as participants. They were given seats, given voices, given a chance to speak. And then the testimony began. For 3 months, survivors came forward. Humans who had lost families during the crisis. Keth, who had been forced to participate in atrocities by their commanders. Members of other species who had suffered under Keth occupation for generations. They told their stories. They named the dead. They described what had been done to them and what they had been forced to do. The tribunal did not seek confessions or demand apologies. It simply listened. It recorded. It remembered. Some of the testimony was difficult to hear. Elderly humans broke down in tears as they described watching their children die. Keth soldiers confessed to actions they had spent their lives trying to forget. Species that had been conquered by the Dominion shared stories of oppression that had lasted for centuries, but there were other stories too. Stories of Keth officers who had refused to fire on civilian targets. Stories of ordinary Keth citizens who had hidden refugees from their own government. Stories of small kindnesses amid great cruelty. These were recorded as well. The tribunal did not distinguish between species when recording virtue. A Keth soldier who had saved human lives was remembered, just as clearly as a human survivor who had endured impossible suffering. When the testimony was complete, Ambassador Okafor addressed the tribunal. "We have heard what was done," he said. "We have named the dead. We have witnessed the suffering of all who came before us. This is the first step toward justice. Not punishment, but witness. Not revenge, but memory. The Keth Dominion committed terrible crimes. These crimes can never be undone. The dead cannot be brought back. The suffering cannot be erased, but it can be acknowledged. It can be remembered. It can be taught to every generation that follows. We offer the Keth people a choice. The choice was simple. The Keth could acknowledge what their empire had done. They could teach this history to their children honestly and completely. They could build monuments to their victims on every world that had suffered under their rule. They could become a species that remembered not just its glories, but its crimes. If they did this, the embargo would end. Trade would resume. The Keth would be welcomed into the galactic community, not as conquerors, but as a reformed people seeking to build something better. If they refused, the isolation would continue. Not forever, but for as long as the Keth maintained their denial. The galaxy would remember what they had done, even if they chose to forget. The new Keth government, led by reformers, including Executor Van, accepted. Construction began on the memorial worlds. Empty spaces were set aside on every Keth colony, every conquered planet, every world that had felt the weight of Dominion cruelty. Monuments rose from the soil. Names were carved into stone. The dead were honored by the descendants of those who had killed them. It was not forgiveness. Humanity did not offer that. The wounds were too deep, the crimes too great. But it was something more valuable in its own way. It was acknowledgement. It was witness. It was the promise that what had happened would never be forgotten and never be repeated. At the final session of the tribunal, a Veeth representative addressed the assembly. Council Imreth had died years ago, but his granddaughter now spoke for his people. She was young and strong, raised on a world that humanity had given them freely. 200 years ago, she said, my grandfather gave humanity a gift of star maps. He thought it was nothing, a small favor between small powers. He did not expect anything in return. 50 years later, humanity came to save my people. They spent their wealth, their resources, their future to rescue a dying species because of that small gift. They remembered what we had done. They repaid it beyond measure. This is what we learned from humanity. We learned that memory is power. We learned that kindness matters. We learned that cruelty echoes through time and must eventually be answered. We learned that a single act of help can change the fate of worlds. The humans remember everything. They remember the water given to refugees. They remember the sanctuary offered during crisis. They remember the medicine that saved children. And they remember the fires that burned their colonies. This is their gift to the galaxy. Not military strength. Not economic power. Memory. The knowledge that what we do matters. That we will be held accountable. That kindness will be rewarded and cruelty will be answered, even if it takes centuries. They are not gods. They are not perfect. But they remember. And that remembering changes everything. Ambassador Okafor delivered the final address. He was an old man now, gray-haired and tired, but his voice was strong. The Terran ledger of bonds has been updated, he said. The Keth debt is marked, acknowledged, witnessed, recorded. The plinths in New Lagos are no longer empty. Names have been added. Not names of enemies, but names of those who chose to face the truth. We do not forgive those who harmed us, but we do not damn their children for their parents' sins. We remember, so that what was done can never be undone, and so that what was given can never be forgotten. This is our gift and our burden. This is what it means to be human. The tribunal ended. The delegates returned to their worlds. The galaxy moved forward, changed forever by what it had witnessed. On 100 worlds, monuments stood in silent testimony. Some honored the species who had shown humanity kindness in their darkest hour. Others memorialized the victims of those who had not. Flowers grew at some. Others stood cold and bare. But all of them carried the same message. Someone remembered. Years later, on a Keth colony world, A young child stood before one of the memorials. It was a simple stone pillar bearing thousands of names. Names of humans who had died when Keth ships burned their colony 2 centuries ago. The child looked up at her parent. "What does this mean?" she asked. "Why do we have this?" Her parent knelt beside her. "It means we remember what our ancestors did," she said. "It means we promise never to do it again. It means we are trying to be better. But it was so long ago. Why does it still matter?" The parent was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because the humans taught us something. They taught us that memory is the most powerful force in the galaxy. More powerful than ships. More powerful than weapons. More powerful than hatred. They remember every kindness they were ever shown. And they remember every cruelty. This is what makes them different. This is what makes them strong. We hurt them terribly. We nearly destroyed them. They could have hated us forever. Instead, they asked us to remember, to acknowledge, to change. So we built this monument. We teach our children about it. We make sure the names are never forgotten, because that is what humanity asked of us. And we learned that when humanity asks you to remember, you remember." The child looked at the monument for a long time. Then she reached out and touched one of the carved names, her small fingers tracing the letters. "I will remember," she said. Her parent smiled. That is all they ever wanted. Above them, stars burned in the eternal darkness. Ships moved between worlds, carrying goods and people and hope. The galaxy continued its endless dance of creation and destruction. But something was different now. Something had changed. Humanity had taught the galaxy to remember. And memory, as it turned out, could change worlds.